Hello, welcome back to Black Book Stacks. I am your host, Toshonda, and I have a cold, obviously, that I'm trying to get over, so forgive me for sounding like some kind of bear that was just roused from hibernation. But I did want to record a video about my last favorite book of 2019 and also shout out some of the January releases that I have either read or I'm looking forward to reading, and then also going over my to be read pile and what I'm reading now to get a head start, I guess, on my reading challenge for 2020, which is going to be 100 books like it was in 2019. I ended up reading 103 books, I think, so a little bit over because I'm an overachiever and that's how I get down. But anyway, nonetheless, without further ado, Black is the Body by Emily Bernard was an incredible book. First of all, I had read, I think, an excerpt of it in the Chronicle of Higher Education, where she talks about teaching the N-word to her students who are predominantly white. Emily Bernard is a professor of English at the University of Vermont, and she lives in Burlington, Vermont with her husband and her twin daughters who are adopted. And she talks about, I think they were adopted from Ethiopia. And she talks about the process of that adoption here. But what's also really incredible about the book is that she starts off talking about essentially being stabbed while she was a graduate student at Yale, which is incredible. Like, it's just this, there's the first essay is Scar Tissue. It's your worst nightmare, right? Especially in the America that we live in now, right? Where racial terrorism is just like a part of the air that we breathe. And so she talks really at length about kind of, you know, sort of just ending up at this coffee shop in New Haven when this guy goes on a stabbing spree and he stabs 7 people, including herself, and just kind of all that had transpired. Yeah, so that's wild. And she talks about teaching the N-word and kind of, you know, the overarching. She has also an essay like called White Friend, right? So it talks about the complications between having friends who are woke and who are white or who may be a different race from you, who actually really are trying very hard to communicate to you across some of the complicating factors like class, like stereotypes, like just plain old ignorance, right? Sometimes people have never had a Black friend before, and just trying to navigate those things as just a writer, as a professor, and as someone who is a mom, and also trying to protect her daughters from that experience, right, of the experience of racial difference. So what I loved about this book was the way that she found herself surprised by her daughter's classmates, right? That she thought that she has this urge and this really visceral desire to protect them from any perceived or actual racism. And what she finds, in fact, is that there are young people who are genuinely better, that the next generation is a little bit better as it relates to these things, and also that her daughters are a little bit unbothered, which I love. They come across as being real sweethearts. So there's also an amazing description. There are lots of really amazing descriptions here. It's a really beautiful book. But she also describes Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God in a way that I've never heard before. I wanted to read it to you, in part because I just finished reading Alice Walker's collection of short stories, The Complete Stories, which was published in the UK in 2014, I want to say. I think it's actually been longer than that. I think it might have been 2004. So it was just published. And so anyway, I've been thinking a lot about Alice Walker. I've been thinking a lot about that as it relates to Zora Neale Hurston, because there is a January release that I'm going to talk about in a minute that connects this. But anyway, the hunger to tell is a drive I inherited from my maternal line. My mother's skill as a poet was something she inherited from her mother, who probably inherited from another female ancestor, and back all the way to Africa. Unlike my mother and grandmother, I have been lucky to find interlocutors. I think that's the word. Hungry listeners, to borrow a phrase from Their Eyes Were Watching God, a book that looks like a novel about romance, but is really a story about women, mothers, and daughters, the primacy of intimacy and conversation, and a woman's fundamental hunger to tell. The body of the Black woman at the center of the tale is the situation. The story is about how this Black woman learns to become a storyteller. In order to narrate her own life, she needs another person to listen, to aid in the tending of her interior. I don't know why that struck me as being so profound. I think it's because I've read Their Eyes Were Watching God. I don't really tend to reread books a lot, but Their Eyes Were Watching God is one book that I've read over and over again. I've given it away to friends. I love it deeply. I love the language in it. Ships at a distance have every man's wish on board is the first line of Their Eyes Were Watching God. There are very few books that I remember the first line of, so I think it's because I've been reading Their Eyes Were Watching God since I was a teenager that I have such a deep and loving connection to it. And so it was really profound for me to have in this book, which has such an amazing title and it's a really beautiful cover, like lots of reasons to pick it up. But one of the reasons that I was so deeply moved by it, especially toward the end, was thinking about this lineage and this tradition of storytelling among Black American women and the ways in which those stories are never really analyzed with I don't often see those stories analyzed in a way that centers the Black American woman's experience, particularly in the South. And I think Emily Bernard was raised in Nashville, Tennessee, so she also has that lens, right, which I think is actually the quintessential American experience. So anyway, Black is the Body. I think it was published in 2019. I'm just going to check real quick. Yes, it was published in 2019, so I definitely recommend it and think that you should pick it up.